I think there are tons of lost civilizations littering our past. We all know Cleopatra and the pharaohs, but who remembers the Nubian kings who turned the tables and ruled Egypt in the 25th dynasty? Yep, that happened. Yet Nubia's monuments and culture are still overshadowed. When discussing ancient civilizations, Egypt often dominates the conversation. Yet south of Egypt, along the middle reaches of the Nile, arose Nubia, a remarkable kingdom whose influence, power, and cultural innovation arguably rivaled its more famous northern neighbor. Though sometimes called Kush, Nubia, or by regional names like Napata and Meroe, this civilization lasted for millennia and left behind pyramids, temples, and an enigmatic writing system still not fully deciphered. The common overshadowing of Nubia stems partly from early archaeologists focusing on Egyptian grandeur. Nubia's sites seemed lesser in scale, or the region's artifacts were appropriated into the narrative of Egyptian conquest. But deeper exploration reveals that Nubia was far from a mere Egyptian satellite. It had its own dynasties that ruled as pharaohs over both Nubia and Egypt, forging an empire bridging the cataracts of the Nile. Its capitals at Napata and Meroe fostered advanced ironworking industries, intricate religious traditions combining native deities and Egyptian gods, and thriving trade links to sub-Saharan Africa and the Red Sea. Though known in classical sources as Ethiopia, a broad ancient label for land south of Egypt, Nubia's actual story is more specific and dynamic. Kingdoms rose and fell, occasionally subduing or being subdued by Egypt, yet always forging an original cultural identity. Their distinctive pyramids, steep and narrow, dot the desert, overshadowed in popular imagination, but standing as proof of a once mighty monarchy that venerated its rulers similarly to pharaonic practices. Explorers and archaeologists in the 19th and 20th centuries rediscovered these relics, opening up the question of how such an empire could slip from mainstream historical memory. From the forging of the earliest Nubian polities around the 3rd millennium BCE to the glories of the Napatan and Meroitic kingdoms, we'll uncover how Nubia balanced between assimilation of Egyptian influences and nurturing indigenous elements. We'll look at the secrets embedded in the Meroitic script, one of the few major ancient writing systems still incompletely understood, and examine the factors behind Nubia's decline and overshadowing by the rising power of Aksum. By shifting focus onto Nubia's achievements, we can reclaim a vital chapter of African and world history, celebrating not just the pyramids along the Nile's southern shores, but the cultural innovations, trade expansions, and spiritual syncretism that made the kingdom so distinctive. Nubia's geography spanned the Middle Nile Valley, from the first cataract near Aswan in southern Egypt down to around the 6th cataract near modern Sudan. This corridor of the Nile is drier and narrower than the lush delta or the broad plains of the Egyptian Lower Nile. Yet the river's annual flood still provided cultivable land in narrow strips, sustaining agriculture and pastoralism. The cataracts, rocky rapids, limited easy navigation, making them both a protective barrier against invasions and a challenge to trade. In antiquity, climate shifts influenced where settlements took hold. Some of the earliest complex societies in the region date back to the A group, B group, and C group cultures, preluding the emergence of more centralized polities. By around 2000 BCE, references in Egyptian records to Kush appear, likely an early Nubian kingdom. Over time, the region's distinct identity solidified. Egyptians sometimes ventured south to exploit gold mines or acquire exotic goods, ivory, ebony, animal skins, and enslaved labor. This dynamic spurred occasional Egyptian military campaigns, but also led to cross-cultural exchange. Nubian societies harnessed the river's farmland, but many Nubians were also nomadic pastoralists, raising cattle and goats. Rock art depicts proud cattle cultures, reflecting how livestock signified wealth. Additionally, the region's strategic location along trade routes linking sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean made Nubia an intermediary in the exchange of gold, incense, ostrich feathers, and more. Over centuries, complex chiefdoms flourished, culminating in a more centralized monarchy that Egyptians recognized as a formidable neighbor. Because the Nile's narrow corridor in Nubia was less agriculturally abundant than Egypt's wide floodplains, Nubians sought alternative economic pillars, like controlling caravan routes or excelling in ironworking. These early routes laid the groundwork for the future Napatan and Meroitic states. Meanwhile, interactions with pharaonic Egypt shaped Nubian religion and art. Local kings might adopt Egyptian-style titles or iconography, forging a dual heritage. Archaeologically, we find tombs with Egyptian motifs but local twists, pointing to a creative interplay of influences rather than blind imitation. Thus, even in these early stages, Nubia was forging its distinct path, balancing influences from the north with local innovation. This complexity set the stage for the region's eventual rise as a power that would, at one point, control Egypt itself. One of the most striking episodes in Nubian history occurred when a dynasty of Nubian kings not only consolidated their homeland, but also swept northward to claim the Egyptian throne. Referred to by modern historians as the 25th dynasty or the Nubian dynasty, these rulers emerged from the city of Napata, near the Fourth Cataract in the 8th century BCE. Their ascendancy mirrored a period of Egyptian fragmentation, giving the Napatan kings an opening to restore a grand vision of pharaonic unity under their own leadership. Kashta, a Nubian king, began exerting influence into Upper Egypt, eventually placing family members in key religious roles at Thebes. His successors, especially Pianki, or Paye, consolidated control, launching a campaign to unify a divided Egypt. Pianki's victory stela, found in Napata, proudly recounts how he overcame local Egyptian princes, traveling the Nile with war galleys and collecting tribute. Interestingly, Pianki portrayed himself as a pious restorer of Egyptian temples, referencing ancient ceremonies to legitimize his rule. This bridging of Egyptian theological tradition and Nubian leadership signaled a bold move. Napatan monarchs considered themselves rightful pharaohs, guardians of the old gods. The apex came under Shabaka and Taharka, whose reign extended from the Delta to the Kushite heartlands. Taharka famously built monuments in both Thebes and Napata, reviving temple complexes in grand style. Egyptian texts from this era regard them as legitimate rulers, albeit with references to their Kushite origin. Despite their achievements, they soon faced a new external threat, the Neo-Assyrian Empire. King Esarhaddon and later Ashurbanipal launched military incursions, driving Nubian pharaohs out of northern Egypt and gradually pushing them back south. By the mid-7th century BCE, the 25th dynasty retreated from Egypt entirely, returning to Napata to continue their line in Nubia alone. Although ephemeral in the grand timeline, this Napatan rule over Egypt was significant. It showcased Nubia's capacity to not only equal, but surpass Egyptian might. The impetus they placed on Egyptian temple refurbishments, sculpture, and architecture left lasting influences in Thebes and beyond. In Nubia itself, the Napatan Golden Age was further shaped by assimilation of Egyptian iconography with local customs, forging a unique identity that would soon transition into the Meroitic Period. While overshadowed in popular memory, this episode stands as one of ancient Africa's most remarkable expansions of imperial power. After retreating from Egypt, the Nubian kingdom regrouped deeper south along the Nile, centering more thoroughly on the city of Meroe. Over the centuries, Meroe evolved into the new capital, overshadowing Napata's earlier prominence. Precisely when this shift occurred remains debated by scholars, but by the 3rd century BCE, Meroe was indisputably the kingdom's cultural and political core. The city's location near the 6th Cataract offered advantages: more rainfall for agriculture, better proximity to trans-African trade routes, and abundant iron ore deposits fueling what some call an iron industry revolution. Meroe's monarchy retained continuity from Napatan predecessors, but gradually embraced different forms of governance. Royal tombs shifted from Napata's Jebel Barkal region to the Meroitic necropolis. Rulers experimented with new regalia styles, blending older Egyptian motifs with local aesthetics. We see decorative schemes of bulls, lions, and the presence of indigenous deities like Epidemic. a lion-headed war god not found in Egyptian pantheons. Through such syncretism, Meroe reaffirmed its own identity distinct from pharaonic traditions. The Meroitic period also introduced changes in how royalty managed successions. Some scholarship suggests that Meroitic rulers allowed or recognized candidacies, powerful queen mothers or reigning queens, exerting formidable influence. Figures like Queen Amanirenas led armies, minted coins, and negotiated with Roman authorities after conflict in the 1st century BCE. This partial empowerment of royal women set Meroe apart from typical male-dominated lines found in many contemporary states. Archaeological excavations reveal that Meroe was not just a political nexus, but also a hub of iron smelting. Slag heaps around the city point to large-scale iron production for tools and weapons, fueling mercantile expansion. Traders caravanned across the desert to the Red Sea or sub-Saharan realms, exchanging metals, textiles, and possibly exotic animals or incense. Meroe's wealth financed the building of distinctive steep-sided pyramids for burials, each smaller than Egyptian pyramids but numerous, over 200 at some sites, testifying to a thriving aristocracy. By forging a distinct identity, Meroe signaled that post-Egyptian Nubia didn't simply recede into obscurity. Instead, it thrived for centuries, bridging Africa's interior with the Mediterranean world, leaving hints of advanced craft traditions and a partially deciphered script that teased the fullness of Meroitic culture. Its architecture, social structures, and artistic achievements form the heart of the Lost Kingdom narrative, so often overshadowed by Egyptian glories. One of the most striking symbols of Nubia's Meroitic civilization are the Nubian pyramids dotting the landscape near Meroe, and other sites like Nuri and El Kuru. While they are smaller than the Giza giants, their sheer number and distinctive style evoke a rich funerary tradition. Rising sharply at angles, sometimes exceeding 60 degrees, each Meroitic pyramid stands atop a burial chamber below ground, with a small chapel at the eastern face. The chapels often feature carved reliefs or stelae depicting the deceased's journey to the afterlife, blending Egyptian funerary iconography, like references to Osiris, with local deities such as Apetamok. These pyramids weren't mere imitations of Egyptian tombs. Their narrower, pointed shape represents a local innovation, perhaps influenced by older Napatan structures, but refined at Meroe. The site hosts dozens of these pyramids in close proximity, forming a dramatic necropolis rising from desert sands. Over centuries, royals and nobles continued constructing pyramids. Some of them rose from about 20 to 30 meters in height, while smaller ones for lesser elites might measure just 10 or 15 meters. The exteriors often used sandstone blocks, though many lost their polished outer layers to time and looting. Unfortunately, in the 19th century, treasure hunters like Giuseppe Ferlini damaged or destroyed pyramid tops searching for rumored riches. He found some caches of jewelry, but irreparably defaced multiple structures in the process, feeding Western stereotypes of Nubia as a mysterious land of hidden gold. Today, archaeologists carefully restore or preserve these pyramids, gleaning insights into Meroitic burial rites. Each structure's orientation and decorative chapels testify to a dynamic religious worldview that fused iconography from older Napatan traditions, Egyptian pantheons, and local beliefs. In many ways, these pyramids anchor the notion of a lost kingdom, so close to Egypt, yet overshadowed historically. Visitors who explore these desert necropolises find that, while smaller in scale, Nubia's pyramid fields are every bit as compelling. They convey the once flourishing wealth and architectural ingenuity of Meroe, reminding us that the Middle Nile corridor produced a grand legacy of monumental building long after pharaonic civilization had receded. Geographically bridging sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean, Nubia thrived off trade for millennia. The Napatan and Meroitic states leveraged their position along the Nile to facilitate commerce with Egypt, Greece, Rome, and beyond. Caravans from Central or Eastern Africa carried ivory, animal skins, gold dust, and incense up the Nile corridor or across the eastern desert to Red Sea ports. Meroe's proximity to raw materials, like iron ore, enhanced the kingdom's capacity to produce valuable tools or weapons for exchange. Simultaneously, foreign luxury goods arrived from the north. Egyptian or Hellenistic influences shaped local art or introduced imported pottery. Roman glass, wine, or bronze items occasionally filtered through, especially during periods of peace. Nubian ambassadors or caravans traveled to cities like Alexandria, or further, forging cultural and diplomatic ties. The find of Roman coins or goods within Meroitic sites suggests vibrant cross-cultural commerce, even if overshadowed by occasional skirmishes along the frontier in Lower Nubia. Seaborne trade along the Red Sea linked Nubia to Arabian and Indian ocean networks, where frankincense, spices, or rare textiles changed hands. Some archaeologists suspect that the kingdom's involvement in these routes contributed to its wealth, letting Meroitic elites sponsor large-scale building projects. Meanwhile, local crafts like intricately glazed ceramics or iron-forged items found markets abroad, further stabilizing the economy. However, controlling trade in such a rugged region wasn't easy. Caravans risked raiders, and internal feuds between nobles or neighboring polities could disrupt safe passage. Meroe's fortunes fluctuated with alliances. For instance, tensions with Roman Egypt threatened to block certain trade corridors, forcing Nubians to negotiate treaties or engage in frontier conflicts. Over time, as new powers emerged, like Axum to the southeast, these vital trade arteries might shift direction, jeopardizing Meroe's prosperity. Nonetheless, for centuries, the kingdom harnessed cross-continental networks, forging an interconnected economy that belies any notion of an isolated, lost kingdom. While overshadowed by classical Egyptian pantheons, Nubian religious practices displayed a unique blend of local gods and pharaonic influences. Initially, Napatan rulers introduced or continued worship of Egyptian deities like Amun, Isis, and Osiris, building temples akin to those in Thebes. Their god's wife of Amun, or oracular traditions at Jebel Barkal, signaled deep alignment with Egyptian theology. But as the kingdom shifted its capital to Meroe, local customs reasserted themselves. Deities such as Apedemak, the lion-headed warrior god, took on prominence in Meroitic iconography. Temples at sites like Naka depict Apedemak in reliefs, sometimes wearing a crown reminiscent of Egyptian design but accompanied by purely Nubian symbols. This lion god exemplified Meroe's martial spirit, protecting the monarchy and symbolizing regal might. Meanwhile, the monarchy continued to revere aspects of Amun or Isis, forging a tapestry of worship that borrowed Egyptian forms while weaving in distinctly Nubian rituals. In tomb chapels, we see afterlife imagery referencing both Osirian resurrection myths and local funerary guardians. Textual inscriptions, though not fully deciphered, likely attest to prayers for a safe journey to a netherworld akin to Egyptian conceptions, yet possibly shaped by indigenous cosmology. Some stelae show the deceased making offerings to Apedemak, or to a joined assembly of gods, featuring Egyptian and Nubian figures side by side. Religious syncretism extended into the structure of priesthoods. Meroitic rulers sometimes appointed or removed high priests of Amun, continuing the old tradition from Napatan times that the monarchy had direct oversight of major cult centers. Yet the style of temple architecture in Meroe grew more local. Smaller sanctuaries with external pylons, adopting distinct relief styles. Over time, this hybrid pantheon and evolving iconography reflect a lively, adaptive spirituality that embraced heritage from the north while retaining strong local character. The result was a deeply symbolic union of African and Egyptian theological themes, a hallmark of Nubian identity that served both ritual life and royal propaganda. One of the great enigmas of ancient Africa is the Meroitic script, a writing system that emerged around the 2nd century BCE in Nubia. Although influenced by Egyptian hieroglyphics, Meroitic developed into its own alphabetic or syllabic form, featuring two variants, a hieroglyphic-like form used for monumental inscriptions and a cursive form for more practical writing on papyrus or ostraca. While modern scholars have identified some letters and partial words, large portions of the language's syntax and vocabulary remain obscure, preventing a full translation of Meroitic texts. Early attempts at decipherment use bilingual inscriptions referencing Egyptian gods or phrases, giving clues to certain Meroitic signs. In the 20th century, specialists like Francis Llewellyn Griffith advanced knowledge of Meroitic letters, but progress stalled for want of an extensive Rosetta Stone-like parallel text. The challenge is that Meroitic was not directly related to Egyptian or other well-documented tongues, and many discovered inscriptions are short funerary or dedicatory lines that lack the complexity needed to decode grammar. Without longer, context-rich texts, it's difficult to reconstruct the nuances of the language. The content hidden in Meroitic texts presumably includes historical records, religious rites, or genealogies of royalty. Unlocking them might illuminate the kingdom's internal administration, trade treaties, or literary traditions. Archaeologists have found stele naming kings or queens, but the deeper significance remains partial guesswork. The existence of an advanced writing system indicates a robust, literate class and underscores that Meroe was no peripheral culture mindlessly imitating Egyptian scripts. Instead, they adapted and developed a unique literacy that stands as a remarkable cultural achievement. For now, the Meroitic script remains one of the last major unsolved scripts from the ancient world. Scholars continue analyzing newly unearthed inscriptions, hoping for breakthroughs. The partial decipherment that does exist already underscores Nubia's intellectual capacity. Each newly identified word or phrase reveals more about how Meroe saw itself in the world. Ultimately, until a fortuitous find or methodological leap emerges, many secrets remain locked in these mysterious lines, adding to the aura of a lost kingdom, whose voice is only half heard through the fragmentary lens of modern scholarship. Despite its centuries-long prominence, the Meroitic kingdom gradually weakened under mounting pressures. Internally, the monarchy faced challenges maintaining strong central control over far-flung territories. Repeated conflicts along the Egyptian border or with other Nubian polities sapped resources. Meanwhile, shifting trade routes sometimes bypassed Meroe, reducing customs revenue. As Roman power in Egypt waxed and waned, so too did cross-border tensions. Sporadic hostilities with Roman authorities in the 1st century BCE or CE harmed Meroe's external commerce, though occasional peace treaties opened fresh opportunities. However, the kingdom's more decisive threat arose from the southeast, where the rising state of Aksum in present-day Ethiopia and Eritrea grew in economic and military power. By the 3rd to 4th centuries CE, Aksum developed robust Red Sea ports, controlling trade routes that once funneled goods to Meroe. Aksum's kings eventually turned their ambitions toward Nubian lands, culminating in a series of confrontations. Historical references suggest that Aksumite armies or their allies inflicted fatal blows on Meroe's infrastructure, capturing key sites or redirecting crucial caravan links. Over time, Meroitic authority and cultural centers withered. Archaeological evidence shows that by around the 4th century CE, Meroe was largely abandoned as a political capital. The once bustling iron workshops fell silent, and smaller successor polities like Nobatia or Makuria in northern Nubia emerged, but these embraced different religious or social frameworks, eventually converting to Christianity. The Meroitic script faded without a thriving state to preserve it. Egyptian, Greek, or local dialects overshadowed it. Over centuries, travelers who encountered these silent pyramids or deserted temples struggled to interpret them. Hence, after nearly a millennium of rising, transforming, and occasionally dominating their region, the old Napata Meroe line concluded. The seat of power and trade in East Africa pivoted to Aksum, while Nubia's once luminous civilization slipped into the domain of lost history, overshadowed by the narratives of Roman Egypt, Christian Nubian successor states, and the overshadowing presence of a new hegemon. It would take modern archaeology to resurrect the memory of Meroe's iron forges and steep pyramids, reaffirming that a sophisticated African kingdom once flourished there in commanding fashion. The Kingdom of Nubia, alternately known by terms like Kush, Napata, or Meroe, has long been overshadowed by the more widely publicized glory of ancient Egypt. Yet this lost kingdom was anything but peripheral in the grand tapestry of African and Mediterranean civilizations. From its earliest stirrings in the Middle Nile corridor, Nubia balanced local culture with outside influences, forging complex trade routes, adopting and adapting Egyptian religious imagery, and eventually conquering Egypt itself under the 25th Dynasty. This Napatan ascendancy proved that Nubians were not passive imitators, but dynamic players in a region where shifting alliances and conquests continually redefined power. Even after retreating from Egypt, Nubia didn't fade away. Instead, at Meroe, it built an independent center of art, trade, and governance, culminating in prolific pyramid building and a partially deciphered script that underscores a literate, sophisticated monarchy. Trade caravans coursing from sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean fueled prosperity, while evolving religion merged lion-headed deities like Apetamak with traditional Egyptian pantheons. Though overshadowed by bigger stories of Rome or early Islamic expansions, Meroe thrived for centuries, forging an iron industry renowned in antiquity. Eventually, the empire's vulnerabilities, shifting trade routes, friction with Rome, and especially the rise of Aksum, eroded Meroe's might. By the 4th century CE, the once grand pyramids and temples stood abandoned, their memory drifting into obscurity. Successor Nubian states later embraced Christianity and had different legacies, further burying Meroe's distinct achievements under the sands of time. Only in the 19th and 20th centuries did explorers and archaeologists realize the import of these pyramids south of Aswan, thereby reclaiming a portion of Africa's ancient heritage too often eclipsed by the luminous tale of Egypt. Today, the Lost Kingdom label still applies in a sense. Nubia's script remains only partially translated, and the complexities of Napatan and Meroitic society remain topics of ongoing discovery. Each artifact, pyramid, or temple calls us to see beyond the simpler narratives of pharaonic rule, revealing an African polity that thrived independently, forged a hybrid culture, and left behind achievements as monumental and vibrant as any in antiquity. By restoring Nubia to its rightful place in the broader historical conversation, we honor the resilience, creativity, and power of a kingdom whose secrets continue to enchant scholars and visitors today.